Hello, BookTube. In today's installment of Boldly Go-vember, Paperback Junkie's easy flippin' read-along for the month of November, where we just read a Star Trek novel. I've been reading a lot of Star Trek novels. I've been rereading a lot of them specifically for the joy of Boldly Go-vember. And for today's, we're briefly going to consider, for the last time, the writing duo of Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreth, who we've seen already as the editors of Star Trek The New Voyages 1 and 2, as the author of one of its short stories, and as the author of two novels, The Price and Fate of the Phoenix. And Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreth wrote two other Star Trek novels. They wrote The Prometheus Design, and they wrote Triangle, this book. And then they stopped. As far as I know, they've never written any other Star Trek fiction. And this is from the early 1980s, and as you can see from the cover, things have changed, right? Those are stills from the movie. Those are movie uniforms. That is the movie Enterprise. That is, in other words, by this point, the visual iconography, the status quo of what's considered canon had all been upgraded in light of a successful movie franchise. And so the kind of rough and ready, very sexually charged Star Trek fiction that these two had been writing for decades was slowly being faded out. And I suspect that's why they stopped writing Star Trek fiction, because they really couldn't do what Paramount required them to do in order to write a Star Trek novel. The Prometheus Design and Triangle are the last two glimmers of their particular style of handling Star Trek. They know the old original series backwards and forwards, every detail, every line, every great wisecrack, every character. And the one main criticism that I had of The Price of the Phoenix and The Fate of the Phoenix is that it's hardly Star Trek at all. It's more Kirk and Spock have an adventure than Kirk and Spock have another adventure. And there are other characters added. The Romulan commander, the villain Omni, one other character in The Fate of the Phoenix, a duplicate of Jim Kirk. But something was missing from those two books that you come to Star Trek for, which is, well, you come to the original Star Trek for, and that is the cast. The dynamic relationships between this particular command crew, the greatest command crew in the history of the Federation. And you hardly got... Scotty's has a couple of lines in The Price of the Phoenix. McCoy has a couple of lines. They don't have anything like good moments, good scenes, or anything like that. The Prometheus Design and even more Triangle rectify that. Here we get Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreth writing is still primarily about Kirk and Spock, but also a lot more McCoy, a lot more Mr. Scott. And that's good. That's good, because they're really good at it when they do it. And this book, there's two main plot lines, the two main plot devices, and the first plot device is the one that's hinted at in the title, and that couldn't be done today in Star Trek fiction, which is that a woman comes on board the Enterprise, a Federation free agent named Sola Thane, who's half alien, and Kirk and Spock both fall in love with her. This book was born originally out of a tossed-off sentence in the middle of a long late-night conversation to the effect of what would ever happen if Kirk and Spock fell in love with the same woman, if they had to compete for the same woman, when they can't compete, when they're brothers, when they wouldn't do it, and when it wouldn't matter if they competed anyway because it would be her choice. And this book sort of fleshes that out. Kirk and Spock both become fascinated with Sola Thane. And the larger plot is that stems from the novelization of the first movie by Gene Roddenberry that we saw here on Boldly Go-vember. A detail of that novelization that never made it onto the movie is that Will Decker, the young captain of the new Enterprise that Kirk demotes in order to go out and face V'ger, was, when he was on Earth, part of the New Human movement, a movement that had been gaining strength on Earth of humans pooling their consciousnesses together in a kind of primitive telepathy, and thereby raising themselves, in their opinion, to a higher level of being. And Roddenberry invokes it early in his novel, and then at the end of the novel, Will Decker embraces a form of that in the extreme with a probe in the form of his former lover, Ilea. And then the concept was just left. Like so much else in Star Trek, the motion picture, the novel, it's full of concepts that no writer ever dealt with after that, because some of the concepts in there are just so strange that you wouldn't do it. This book grows out of that idea of the new human movement, of collective movements. There is an ambassador on board the Enterprise, Ambassador Galbraith, who is part of a oneness. He is a spokesperson, sort of like the arm of a jellyfish. He is a part of one of those onenesses, and he encourages everyone to join. He's not evil, but there is a coercion involved, and he has, of course, subtle and largely undemarcated mental powers. And as sinister as that might seem on the surface, it turns out that that's for the good, because there's also another collective, the totality, that wants to do the same thing, only without permission. The totality is not asking. And so you've got the plot that's percolating in the front here with Solothane and a bunch of interplanetary intrigue, lots of action again. These two write action really well. You've got that plot, but in the background you've got this war for minds going on between two unseen entities. They're unseen because they're collective. You can't see them. But at one point in the book, we're told just matter-of-factly that 3 out of the command crew that I just named are possessed either by the totality or by the oneness, and aren't themselves. And we're not. The war that goes on here, using Solothane as both an agent and a kind of tuning fork, is really, in a really nice touch, for the greatest exponent of individualism anywhere in the galaxy, and that's Jim Kirk, who, even Mr. Spock he's a vibrant, indignant individual, but he does mind meld. He does know what it's like to share his consciousness with someone else, whereas Kirk is the ultimate individual, the ultimate starship captain. And those ideologies, what identity is, how we define who we are, where we make a stand for our own personality, for the things that we believe in when we're stripped of everything else, those run throughout the Star Trek fiction of Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreath, even starting in that first short story that we talked about, The Procrustean Petard, where a handful of Enterprise crew members, including Kirk and McCoy, have their genders swapped. Where that short story deals explicitly with the issue of identity. Who am I at my essence? And, of course, so does The Price and Fate of the Phoenix, because the villain Omni has created a device that can completely duplicate you. So who are you? And this book is, and also the Prometheus design, but this one even more so, that is brought to the fore, again, in bright primary colors. Who are you? And what stops you from being subsumed into a larger conglomerate consciousness? And the amazing thing about these two authors is that they manage all that highfalutin stuff. McCoy, for instance, is a big character in this book, who wasn't before. They manage all that highfalutin ideological stuff while also writing a rip-snorting plot full of action and great character lines and whatnot. So Triangle is really good. This is, I promise, the last that we will talk about Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreath. As Boldly Go-vember progresses, we are going to move on to other books and other authors and all sorts of other Star Trek-y stuff. I just wanted to mention this one because when am I ever going to get a chance to talk about Triangle again on book 2? So that's it for today. That is Triangle by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreath. No idea if you can find a copy. This copy is in absolutely perfect mint condition, so I'm assuming that at some point along the line, Mark at Richardson Reed sent it to me, because as far as I know, he's the only person who can go out to a used bookstore and find a 50-year-old paperback that looks like this. I mean, this still has the sheen on the plastic of the cover, so it had to have come from him, and I'm very grateful. But we'll move on. We'll move on tomorrow to some other Star Trek book. I am now finished. It's been episode after episode after episode of me talking about these two, and now I'm finished talking about them. I recommend their stuff, but Star Trek fiction is moving on. It's moving past what they do. As you can tell from the cover, Star Trek fiction is now starting to call out to the movie. And there'll be other movies. So you can't live in the old dot matrix fan fiction world forever. Unfortunately, you can't. So Star Trek fiction is moving on, and we're going to move on with it. so I'll wrap this up for now, and we'll get back to Star Trek again tomorrow. Who knows what? We'll find something to talk about. And in the meantime, I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.